All right, next we have got our first panel discussion, bringing together an amazing field of expertise and experience. For those of you who have been here before, you will recognize this panel, both from your time in state government, but from the last 2 rounds we've had this group. Always an exhilarating conversation. We've got cabinet secretaries past and present. We've got California leaders who've been driving innovation in government for decades. In fact, it was this group of individuals after our first forum in 2023 who launched the California Center for Government Innovation, CCGI, who helps put this on every year and helps, as Andrea talked about at the beginning, help bridge industry and government in identifying the things that we can be focusing on together for innovation. So a huge thanks to this group for continuing their service through this new role. So please help me in welcoming to the stage former Government Operations Secretary and current Governor's Senior Counsel on Innovation and Efficiency, Amy Tong, California's first Government Operations Secretary, Maribel Badger, the former CalHHS Secretary and Senior Advisor to Governor Brown, Michael Wilkening, and former Cabinet Secretary to Governor Brown and former Director of the Department of Finance, Keely Bosler.
Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here again, and especially to be here on stage with many of my friends and ex-colleagues, and people who are just really passionate about making government work for the people. And I really want to thank our last speaker for her really personal story about how important government services are to people that we serve, the individuals that live here in California, because I think keeping that at the center is always really, really important. But today, I'm really excited to be here and to be a part of this new nonprofit Center for Government Innovation, the California Center for Government Innovation, that we're really trying to build and make very specific to California. And I think, when we were putting this together and thinking about the mission is to create opportunities for collaboration between government and the technology industry to improve the lives of California through focused leadership. There is so much noise in the world today, but we really want to focus on what is effective. And we don't have enough time in the day to do everything, so we really do need to do that. So I want to just really start with this panel. This is a group of people who have done many things throughout their careers in state government, but really talk about this word collaboration. What are we talking about? And what are some of the key ingredients to making that effective collaboration actually happen? And Mike, I'm going to start with you down there.
So yeah, for me, it's really about an ecosystem and building that ecosystem. Government can't do it by itself. Any of us who've been in government know the limitations of what you can actually achieve on your own, that you really do need engaged partners, and I stress the word partners. There are too many just vendors out there. There needs to be a partnership that's built where it's for the benefit of both. Academics, it's a whole group of people that you need to bring into solving any of these really large problems that the government struggles with. And especially as we're seeing more and more, Nick mentioned in the first panel that there's no large initiative you can do now doesn't have a huge technology component to it. And so more and more you have to embed those principles inside of what you're trying to achieve and partner with the technology area to really make sure that you're able to move forward and achieve the goals that you have. And I think it also is bringing in that concept that we all talked about the last session or last year, was that the policy and program people need to be involved in this. This can't just be you turn things over to the IT community and say, go do it. There has to be more than just a sign off on a form that's the executive engagement.
Amy, I wanted to go to you next, just in terms of living through the pandemic and the extraordinary speed that we had to move to stand up things that government wasn't even doing before that. We broke a lot of we had to really change the way we did things during that time. But now we're not in as much of a crisis. There's always some level of crisis in California. I will say that, or in government in general, having lived through many years prior to the pandemic, and experiencing, it felt there was always something, a fire or a riot or something going on. But how do we make this collaboration, this innovation mindset sustainable for the long run? And I think that's just something that's all on our mind, especially as there's a lot of changes coming forward in the next year with leadership.
Yeah, thank you, Keely, for that. And the mentioning of like the journey that we have all gone through. And, first of all, I do want to take a moment, as Adam saying that the four of us here, and I always feel like the imposter amongst this group because you guys are all my bosses. And then at the same time, we're hearing Leanna and earlier Nick help kick this off. And of course, Adam is my former colleague as well. I think this kind of a continuation of thought leaders and supporting them in the role that they are in and continue to celebrate the accomplishment and, remove all the barriers on what's in front of them creates, for me, it's a very important level of collaboration. And I know Mike talks about collaborating with our private sector and our IT and policy area needs to work together. Looking back, as maybe this is a little bit of a reflection, right? Even before pandemic, to your point, Keely, California State is always dealing with some sort of crisis. And then when that happened, if you look around the people that come together in dealing with, those crises, not only the individual that bring along with a lot of experience, and also individuals that have been tested over and over. They are the grace under crisis. They are the ones that are continue to be innovative because in a crisis mode, you are required to deliver things in a very, very different mechanism. And when we are not in a crisis mode, you are also looking for these people who have gone through the hard knocks of school, if you will, that can continue to share their experience for the people that are to come after you, so that this type of a knowledge and a innovation mindset can continue. So I think, to me, when we talk about collaboration, it's also making sure that there's a good succession of thought leaders that share that kind of mindset and giving them the pathway, showing them all the lessons learned, and then also help them, roll up your sleeve to work with them, leaning in to see and demonstrate what collaboration is about. And that, to me, is a very important trait when it comes to the human resources and how we keep collaboration going.
Thank you for that. One thing we heard from Leanna is really the commitment to move away from the waterfall. And this is something I learned from Mary Bell a long time ago, because she's many of our teacher. I like this description that the waterfall method is a pledge not to learn anything. Can you talk a little bit, Mary Bell, just about, again, back to this theme of collaboration, but just some of the ways in which you have seen effective collaboration, and also talk a lot about some of the challenges to moving away from this waterfall mentality that you've experienced.
Well, thank you very much, Keely, and I'm honored to be here with all of you and my dear colleagues, and seeing so many dear friends and former colleagues in the audience is terrific. And Leanna, thank you for your incredible remarks this morning. And I was so reminded of so many things with Nick's discussions. I'm sitting over there just chomping at the bit, whispering to Amy and whispering to Stu Drown, and we got to do this. We did that. Anyway, it's wonderful to wander down memory lane and know how many successes we've had and how many successes you all are carrying on. The collaboration, and Mike hit on this, between the private sector and the public sector is so critical. And I have found throughout my career, both at GovOps and frankly at the CPUC, and when I was cabinet secretary as well, is we get into an adversarial role. We're checking each other. Sometimes the policy line that has then taken to a statute, that then is taken to a regulation, that is then taken to a guideline, forces us to do that. And in the IT procurement world, I used to describe that we grew up a mirror onto each other. As we forced more things because of a failed project, the throat to choke happened, and then we had a new statute, we had a new reg, we had a new guideline, and industry had to follow us. They had to mirror us. So as we became more bureaucratic and more inflexible, unfortunately, in some cases, so did industry. And that does not bring about innovative thinking. That does not bring about, for sure, any agile process. I'd say the waterfall process is check the checker, and check again. Let's just be as bureaucratic as we want. And that is not collaboration. As Liana described a little bit ago, a new process, a process that we all have been working on for 6-7 years of how to develop a much more agile process, absolutely dictates the need for collaboration. The program people, the people in the public we're trying to serve, and the technology that we're going to use to do it are all at the table day one, or you've already failed. So the collaboration has to start very early on. And the listening to each other, to the end user, and to will the technology work, will it apply, and can we iterate? Can we get the best product and move on? And I like to really think sometimes about a Dalai Lama quote that I try and repeat to myself because I tend to talk too much, is when you talk, you are only repeating what you already know. But if you listen, you may learn something new. We need to do more listening in our collaboration.
Amen to that. Absolutely. I love that. I want to switch gears a little bit and follow on some themes that we've already heard this morning, but there's this gap between policy and delivery. And as somebody that has worked my entire career in the policy space, I'm actually quite humbled, and I think really felt this, especially during the pandemic when we were trying to do so many things so fast, and we realized how many limitations there were. But what are some strategies and some things that, if you were able to wave a magic wand and make things different, what are some of the areas that you would push for more insight into what we learn when we're delivering and how we can inform what the policy should be, because often we're deciding the policy without all of that information. So, Amy, I'll start with you this time, and maybe you can talk just a little bit about your reflections on that topic.
Yeah, I think, thank you, Keely. And I think for someone that grew up in the tech background, and I would classify myself as more of an operation background rather than policy background. But as I move in my career journey and to where I am today, inevitably you're going to be switching more and more into the policy side. But I see that for someone that really, for those audience that are in that IT, as much as we say IT needs to partner with the program and policy area needs to partner with the technology side, I would have to say, now that I'm more on the policy side, for those of you that are growing up on the program and policy side, be intentional and invite your technology partners to the table, right? And this is what I have witnessed firsthand. Great policy intention suck at implementation. And the reason they suck at implementation, not because people are trying to make it difficult, because one is in today's digital era, they may not have the firsthand knowledge on what are the arts possible in terms of technology serving as an enabler, right? Chris, given you mentioned that. So that way too often people still see technology as, after I figure everything out, I'll bring you in to see if you can implement. as opposed to, and then the technologists are so used to sitting and they say, I will only talk about it and come in and talk about the security side of it, the privacy side of it, the data side of it. Those are all cool, but those consideration needs to be part of the implementation planning, not only when it's given to you that is being tossed over the fence so that, you just figure out how to do it. And so inevitably, that lack of partnership from the beginning, having people sitting at the table side by side, looking at from the policy lens, what is the best way to implement with the technology capability up front, that's where you create not only the gap, but a much, much longer drawn-out process that people complain about. Why does it take years? Why is it so expensive to implement something if it requires some technology implementation to support it? So what we're trying to do, and which is the reason why we're pushing so hard on the agile methodology, is that when you have an intent that you're trying to reach, an outcome you're trying to reach, work with your technology partner or somebody with this kind of background. Start doing prototyping, proof of concept up front to say, is this meeting our needs? Is this not meeting our needs? If it's not, what type of policy changes we might need to entertain? So let's not just go down the path blindly. That type of collaboration really need to be shortened in a much tighter and shortened cycle in an iterative manner. That, I think, it's very, very essential to close that gap between policy and implementation.
Thank you, Amy. That was actually really helpful to me. Mike, maybe you can talk a little bit, just being from the health and human services world, where we have not just the people here in Sacramento that we're working with, but every 58 counties. Can you talk just a little bit more about some of the challenges, but then also some of the opportunities to bridge that gap between policy and implementation, and maybe some pitfalls that you've seen?
And we were talking about how long some of this takes. I mean, you get the policy in place, you run it through, you have an IT system, you're dealing with the counties trying to figure out how to implement. Often there's hiring, training, all of those things. The runway that you're on is just so incredibly long for a lot of these things. I used to, in the various roles that I had, I would actually, I'd go home and I'd mess around with my sprinkler system because I could figure out if it was broken and I could fix it immediately and I could see what was screwed up. And so often in the systems that we've created, you just can't see. You don't know whether you've broken something until years down the line. You don't know what the fix is, so you can't rapidly change and figure out, if I did this, okay, what happened there? I do think that there's an aspect, you brought up the pandemic, which was a whole different type of crisis. It was a crisis at a massive scale. But I do think that there are opportunities in crisis and lessons that we should be learning from the crises, because it forces us to get into that cycle of the rapid iterations, and you can see very quickly whether you solved the problem you were trying to solve or not. And it's much more akin to kind of that sprinkler reference of like, I do something, did it work? No, it didn't. Okay, let's try something else. It worked, great, it seems to be going. Let's continue to do more of that. Let's monitor it. Let's see how that's going. I think that's one of the things that the government generally is pretty terrible at, is actually taking the time to step back from those incidents and learn the lessons. Instead, I've seen a lot of governments starting to slip back into the procedures that they had before the pandemic. There were things that were done in the pandemic that certainly were not advantageous and did not work well. But there were things that we found actually were productive and that cut a lot of time. And so I think that we should be spending a bit more time really trying to learn from those. And that's not just the pandemic. I mean, we see those in the fires in California, when you have earthquakes. Anything where there's a crisis, it forces us to really coalesce around the minimum that you have to do to address the issue so that you can do it quickly. Now, it may not be the most cost-effective as well, and so you need to think about those aspects. It's certainly not the best way to do it as far as stress on individuals. So we need to think about the processes that we put in place that allow us to do that in a less stressful environment. But I do think that there are opportunities in these crises that we see to then adapt and change the way that we're delivering for people.
I love that. Never waste, never waste a good crisis to really learn. Maribel, I know that you are really passionate about this. You know, there is this pervasive culture in government, and that is the better safe than sorry. You know, the fear of being hauled in front of the legislature because something didn't go exactly as it was planned or supposed. What are some wisdom, some guidance that you can give us to really think about how to get people out of that mindset and out of that very entrenched and I think Jennifer Polka calls concrete boat kind of mentality, and into one that's really focused on outcomes?
Thank you, Keely. Well, it's hard, frankly. It's really hard. And change is really hard to sustain. And one of the reasons it's hard to sustain is because it can be very uncomfortable. And particularly in a bureaucracy where we have implemented over time the checks on the checker, as I said earlier. So if you're trying, for example, to really use an agile process, and not just calling it agile, because I have seen that there's some hybrids out there. And either you're going to do it in an agile manner or you're not. Because what I've seen is there's some fallback. We are calling this project agile, but you know what? Sure looks and smells and feels a lot more like the good old waterfall. Check, command, control. And that's not going to work. That is going to lead us right into a failed IT project. But what I really think is important is, and this again, this isn't easy, this is hard. In your program managers and in those who they report to, the leadership is so important. Liana talked about trust. Leaders have to trust the people they have hired to do the job, and they've got to not be all things to all people. In other words, micromanaging. If you've hired a program manager, give that person the freedom to do their job. And your oversight should be a light touch. And be there as cover for that person. We all are going to make mistakes. We all have had programs that we were in charge of that didn't go wonderfully. So what? You'll learn, as we've talked about, and you move on. You better yourself, you correct yourself, you help your employees, you give them cover, you lead them, you don't berate them, you don't clamp down on them with more rules and more checks. That does not sustain change. That sustains an old way of cover your rear end with more rules and more inflexibility. And I'm telling you guys, that ain't innovation, and it's not going to get our state to where we need to be in this modern time. And we've seen it too many times. When something's uncomfortable, you fall back to what you know. After a crisis, you had to do all those things. But now suddenly we start falling back to what we know and what we're comfortable with. And that's checking this box, making sure that box is checked. That is not agile, that's not innovative, and that is not going to win the day. We will not get to where we want to be. But it goes back to leadership, Keely. It goes back to people in management positions and those above them that have some trust in their employees. Give their employees some freedom. Don't micromanage the hell out of them. And because you know what happens? It's mirror image stuff I talked about before. When we're doing it, our technology partners, our industry partners start doing the same thing.
You're reminding me of. You're reminding me. No, I love it. You're reminding me of something that I always thought of when I was in these leaders. Like, I need to know what I don't know, And I think that, when people come with a very ticked and tied, this is exactly what we're going to deliver, and it comes to, and I mean, that's just not true if you haven't done the work to iterate and understand how it's going to go. Mike, I see you've got your mic up, so.
I think as Maribel was talking, it's I think you can even take that to the inter-branch relationships and how the legislature and the administration deal with each other. And one of my fears is, as we start talking about delivery, as we start talking about outcomes, that there's some impetus in the legislative bodies that, well, what we need to do is we need to be more prescriptive. We need to write more clear, the law needs to be more prescriptive, and that's absolutely the wrong way to go with this. And it's, as Maribel was talking about, the relationship between management and staff, I was like, that's exactly the same sort of relationship that you need between the legislative and executive bodies, of the legislature being clear about what it is that it's trying to do, what outcomes it's trying to get, but then trusting that the administration is going to actually deliver that and giving them the space to do so. And then the oversight should be more of a collaborative, how is this going, what do we need to adjust, rather than what most of us have experienced in oversight, where you're just dragged in front of the legislature, and it's not a pleasant experience for us. It's not an informative experience for the legislature. So that's why I was just thinking that as you were talking, that there's more and more talk about how that relationship should work, and I think that you were laying out a good path for that.
If I may just add to that, it's so true. And when we allow ourselves to be drug in front of the legislature and giving them the throat to choke, one of the more important things, Amy and I did this when she was CIO and I was at GovOps, is you have to, it's painful, take the time to educate the legislators on the process that you're hoping that they will either adopt through the budget or through bills in policy committees. Go to the staff, tell them what you're doing. Remember our monthly meetings? And so that when a bill is before a policy committee or the budget is in appropriation, it's too damn late. You have got to explain the why of the policy and what you're trying to do very early on.
Thank you for reminding about the asymmetric information that the legislature may have about the implementation. And so I think that's really an important point. Amy?
This is such an important topic. I want to build on. Sorry, Kelly. One more thing is, I think we talked about the style of a staff and your team members' relationship, the oversight, and then the education and all that. What I think the two other points I really like to make is, don't underestimate the time it would take to build relationship as well, because I still have seen. And whether this is crisis mode or in a time that has urgency, and we have a year left for this administration. The governors always say hey, we're on the expiration day, we got to move, and that's a sense of urgency that we all need to deal with. But in many times, I still see people spending way too much time on email communication, back and forth, to trying to solve a problem, instead of pick up a phone, take somebody out to a coffee and have a real conversation, right? That, to me, is part of the education process. And along with it, that is also where you can build relationship, build that trust, build that sense of confidence. And then also, as there are times you need big meetings, like this gathering, you share thoughts. There's also time, one-on-one, smaller group strategy session goes a long way for people to understand where you're coming from. And if everything is using an email as a de facto communication vehicle, that does not get you, very far in terms of making those changes that is already very hard to do. So that's one thing. And sustaining a change, yes.
I love that, and it brings me back to something that Adam said earlier also, is really understanding the constraints that you're working under as well. So not just where you're coming from, but also what barriers, what constraints exist. I'm gonna end with my final topic, and we've already touched on it some, but we've got some headwinds. We've got budget deficits looming. The LAO recently put out an 18 billion number. It might be larger, it might be smaller, hard to tell. Finance is working hard on that right now. But also wholesale change in the federal financing of one of the largest state programs the state has, that the state finances Medicaid, and a lot of changing rules in which the state and local government and managed health organizations will have to comply. As our resident health and human services expert, Mike, I'm going to start off with you and just maybe you could share a little bit of advice and guidance around dealing with these types of headwinds, especially HR1 that the state's going to be very hard at work dealing with.
I don't want to downplay the profound impacts that HR1 is going to have on the states. From the state budgets on the error rates, and so the share of costs that a lot of the states are going to have, including California likely, to the loss of benefits that individuals are going to have both in SNAP and Medicaid. So these are going to have very profound impacts on government and individuals. I do think that there are some opportunities in it as well, which I probably didn't think when it first was coming down. And it gets back to that crisis concept of when we all saw the time frames that are involved in HR1. So if you're dealing with the SNAP error rate, either your data has already been solidified if you're using fiscal year 25, federal fiscal year 25, or you're a couple of months into the data collection if you're using federal fiscal year 26, which started October 1st. So you've had absolutely no opportunity to change the way that you do business, and now are going to face the consequence associated with the error rates and what that means for a share of cost. And for a state like California, that's potentially over $1 billion that California is going to have to come up with under a share of cost scheme, as well as the impacts on work requirements changing in SNAP and people that will lose benefits. You move over to Medicaid, which also has a work requirement aspect to it, and California is likely to see lots of people lose their Medicaid benefits. The reporting requirements that the federal government has put in place, originally, most people looked at it and they said it's impossible. That you have to, by next October, you have to have systems up that are able to track work requirements. So this is either the number of hours that people are working, their educational, meeting it through educational measures, or through volunteer. And so being able to bring the systems up that can actually track all of those various aspects and have them operational by October and then in use by December, so basically in a year. We were talking about with Nick, this is normally, you're in a decade-long sort of a path to get that sort of thing done. And that's not an option. Like if people aren't able to report that they're actually meeting the work requirements, they lose Medicaid. And so the state has to figure out how to comply with those incredibly fast deadlines. And I think there's opportunity in that. I think it is actually possible. I think a lot of things have to be broken in order to do it. A lot of the normal ways of approving projects need to change. The normal way, you cannot possibly go into the systems that HHS has right now, modify those systems in the time frame in which we're talking about, using the traditional ways in which we've done it. It's absolutely impossible to do. Instead, it's going to require different ways of doing that, different approaches, whether that's external systems that you then bolt on, or coming up with different relationships with new vendors or different relationships with your existing vendors. It's going to force everyone to change the way that they're doing that. And I actually think if we can prove that that's possible, and I firmly believe it's possible if we get out of our own way, that could potentially change the way that we do IT procurements writ large across all of government, and it can rebase what we think is possible and the timeframes that we think are possible and the level of service that we should expect out of these systems.
So
Amy, yeah.
I'll go right into that. As Killian mentioned, not only the state, and this is public knowledge, going to have a headwind of a very, very constrained budget, not only this year, likely next year. And then with all of these federal changes like the HR 1, right, tremendous challenge. And this is the same time the governor asked me to say, hey, you know, with the federal DOGE going on, everything else, we have one last year in this administration. This was about when we have 18 months. This is about March timeframe. What can we do to make sure that, you know, we leave this, by the time our administration wraps up here, that we leave the state in a much, much better state. And that's when California Breakthrough Initiative, not California DOGE, but California Breakthrough, specifically focusing on the efficiency, effectiveness, and engagement of how government operates. And when he talked to me about this and we had a chat, I was like, yes, I can do this. And then there's no budget associated to it. And by the way, this federal change of HR 1 needs to be part of the portfolio. So I called Jeffrey Marino. I'm like, hey, want to do this together? He doesn't really have a choice, but he said yes. And then we call Adam Dondro, who's standing over there, say, look, there are many initiatives that California Breakthrough is going to focusing on. There's tons of cool stuff that we're working on and making government more effective. But this is a moment that we all need to rise to Mike's point, not what we absolutely need to do in a very chaotic crisis management way to meet what is absolutely minimum, what these changes to come. Leverages this as an opportunity. How do we design our government delivery differently? And I think I recall there was this talk that Jen Polkov also mentioned, that we brought her name, that government seldom reacting to whatever is in front of us, whether it's a policy change or statutory change or something like that, and then we just do everything we can to meet that requirement from a compliance aspect, rather than take a moment to say, can we truly understand the intent, and whether it's a good intent or a mediocre intent, but take the opportunity to design how we want to deliver this service. So now we're under very, very tight budget constraint, very, very tight timeline. But we recognize if we don't do this right, a lot of individuals are going to lose their benefits. A lot of individuals not going to be able to opt into the benefits that are, supposed to get. And government, once again, have this black guy not able to deliver. So let's take this moment. Let's rise to the occasion, coming from a design aspect, human-centered design aspect, coming from this is an opportunity to leverage all of the technology that has evolved so much that could help us, fast, deliver in a different manner and really apply the agile methodology. Let's try it. Let's try it all the way through. Let's find out whether it works or not before 2 years down the road. And let's use this opportunity to look at our internal oversight structure. Break that up in the part that is actually really, really helpful to empower that kind of change, provide a necessary guardrail, but not so much as controlling to these type of change. So that's why I say yes to the California Breakthrough Project. This is yet reason why we are going to apply the approach on efficient, effective, and engagement government into how we are dealing with this HR changes from the federal government.
Thank you for that, Amy. Maribel, I would love to hear your wisdom to close us down here on really leading through headwinds and through difficult times.
Well, this wisdom, not my wisdom, but I could not agree with both Mike and Amy more, Keely. It's this, Mike, to your point, get out of your own way. Government's got to get out of the way. In this moment, when we do have to implement HR 1, we don't have any way other than to implement it at this point in time. And we have huge headwinds that are unbelievable in my mind. However, if we do not look at our own processes, break down the damn chain of command and command control kind of mentality, we're not going to be able to do it. Technology is not the only answer, and maybe it's not the first answer when we're in the midst of this. We need to look at ourselves and our process, our guardrails, our check the boxes, however you want to describe it. We're not going to be able to get to the technology and have technology at the table if that's what we start with. We have to change. We have to be flexible. We have to trust that we can be flexible and successful. And if we don't do that, we're going to lose out as a state, and the people of California will lose out. It's really up to all of us to put on our best side of leadership and understand that flexibility and trust and understanding and listening is very, very important. And we have to do it fast. We have to get out of our own way. Our leaders have to help us get out of our own way, and let's go do it.
I love ending on that, really focusing on outcomes and not the process, which is something that is easier said than done. But I just want to thank this group of people for being here today and for sharing all of their wisdom.